A woman a jealous empire tried to erase comes back with 3 little boys. A longer memory than anyone expected, and the one man soul should never have taught what losing her costs. If I asked you to spare her, would you? Amara's voice did not shake. Not with 3 little boys behind her. Not with half of soul pretending not to stare. Not with Choi Sorin on her knees on the marble floor, mascara broken loose under the ballroom lights. Kang Jae-hyun answered without looking away from the woman who had once left his pregnant wife in the rain. No. The room went still. Then he spoke again, quieter somehow, which made it worse. Mercy is what created this. But that was not how the story began. It began on a Thursday in late October, with rain tapping the windows of Mire Women's Clinic hard enough to sound impatient, and Amara Cole standing in the billing office, trying not to let humiliation show on her face. She was 29, exhausted, and beautiful in the way tired women sometimes were without meaning to be. Her box braids fell almost to her waist, neat and heavy and shining despite the long shift. There was a small gap between her front teeth that appeared only when she forgot herself enough to laugh, which had not happened much lately. "I'm not asking for a miracle," she told the landlord on her cracked phone screen. "I'm asking for 48 hours. The clinic hallway smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. Somewhere down the corridor, a newborn cried, thin and furious. The heat in the building had not fully kicked in, and cold sat low against the tiles. On the other end of the call, the landlord sighed like rent was a moral issue. "You already asked for 48 hours, Miss Cole." She closed her eyes, counted once, opened them again. Her hours had been cut that morning. Visa paperwork was still pending. Her savings were halfway to nothing. And in Houston, her younger brother Isaiah had texted 3 times asking if she was eating properly, which was how younger brothers asked if money was okay when they knew it wasn't. "I know," she said. "I'm asking better this time." The man did not laugh. That would have required softness. "Friday," he said. "After that, I changed the code." The line went dead. Amara lowered the phone slowly, rubbed a thumb over the small bottle of shea butter in her scrub pocket, and whispered the prayer her grandmother taught her long before bills and airports and soul. Then the clinic's side doors burst open. Cold rain came in first. Then men. 3 of them, moving fast, black coats darkened with water. A 4th stumbled between them with blood running down his sleeve. And behind them, walking like chaos belonged to him, came a man in a charcoal overcoat with rain on his lashes and something dangerous in the stillness of his face. "Get him away from labor and delivery," Amara snapped before anyone else could speak. The tallest man turned toward her, not rushed, not confused, just turned, as if the room had shifted around her voice. That was the event that started everything. The wounded man was young, too young for the kind of blood soaking through his shirt. Amara shoved open the treatment room with her shoulder and pointed. "Table, now." One of the men hesitated at the door. "No weapons in here," she said. His hand went instinctively inside his coat. The man in the charcoal overcoat spoke without raising his voice. "You heard her." The gun came out, then another, then a knife. One by one, laid on the stainless tray with a clatter that would have sounded absurd anywhere except a maternity clinic at 11:30 at night. Amara moved to the injured boy first. Entry wound high on the shoulder. Not immediately fatal if the bleeding stopped. Her hands were steady, because they had learned long ago that panic was a luxury for people with backup. "Hold this," she told the man nearest her. When he didn't move fast enough, the quiet one in the overcoat stepped in and pressed his hand where she indicated, palm firm, pressure exact. Not squeamish, not careless. Listening. "Good," she said. "Don't get worse at it." One of the others looked offended on his behalf. The man himself did not. Up close, he smelled faintly of rain on stone and expensive leather. His face was controlled in a way that made most people look messy by comparison. Dark hair, damp at the temples, sharp mouth, a thin white scar just under his chin, nearly hidden unless the light caught it. "Name?" she asked the injured boy. "Minsu," he gasped. "Stay with me, Minsu." She looked at the man holding pressure. "And you?" He met her eyes. "You planning to answer?" she asked. "Or should I call you mysterious rich man until discharge?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Almost. "Jae-hyun." She nodded once, like that meant no more to her than a blood type. Another nurse rushed in, supplies, gauze, clamp. The room filled with the wet, metallic smell of blood and the rhythmic beep of a monitor catching up to disaster. Minsu cursed through his teeth. Amara leaned close. "You don't get to die dramatically in my clinic. It's embarrassing for all of us." That got a strained laugh out of him. Jae-hyun looked at her for a second too long. When the doctor finally took over and the wound was stabilized, Amara stripped off her gloves and found him watching her again from across the room, coat dripping quietly onto the tile. She was too tired for mystery. "If you're part of whatever this is," she said, gesturing once to the men, the blood, the weapons tray, "next time take it somewhere that doesn't have newborns sleeping 20 feet away." The room changed. Not loudly. The other men just went still. Most people buried honesty because it cost too much. Amara had never had enough to protect herself with softness. Jae-hyun wiped a line of blood from his hand with a folded cloth somebody had offered him and said, "You always talk to strangers like that?" "Only the ones who need to hear it." She turned and walked toward the sink. Behind her, silence stretched. In 15 years of running his empire, nobody had walked away from him first. She should have forgotten him. She did not. Mostly because when she reached for her bag to leave, he said, "Miss Cole." She looked back. "You haven't eaten since noon." Her hand stopped on the strap. The man's eyes dropped once to the slight tremor in her fingers, then back to her face. "Even strong things break when they're run empty," he said. She hated that the words stayed with her after he left. By the next afternoon, Seoul had already decided to make her life worse. The clinic director called all staff to the lobby for the foundation announcement. Cameras, flowers, too much perfume in the air. Amara stood near the back in navy scrubs, trying to look invisible, and failing mostly because she was taller than she wanted to be. The marble floor gleamed. Outside, black sedans lined the curb like a warning. Then the lobby doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped back in perfect unison. A receptionist beside Amara inhaled sharply. "Chairman Kang." Another woman lowered her eyes so fast it looked like prayer. Amara went cold first, then still, then angry, because there he was. Not mysterious rich man, not Jae-hyun of the rain in the treatment room. Kang Jae-hyun, CEO of Hanul Group, patron saint of children's hospitals, the name whispered in 2 languages depending on whether people were talking about stock prices or bodies. He crossed the lobby with that same impossible calm, guards orbiting him without seeming to, and every person in his path shifted aside. On the screen behind the podium, His smile from some magazine interview looked polished and harmless. The real one didn't smile at all. He stopped when he saw her. That was the worst part. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had known exactly where to look. The director hurried forward, nearly folding herself in half. "Chairman Kang, thank you for your continued generosity." He said, already looking past her, at Amara. A whisper started 2 people down, then another. "Is that her?" "Who?" "The nurse from last night." Someone else, quieter, with fear in it. "Do you know who he is?" Yes, Amara thought. That was becoming the problem. The speech blurred, something about expansion, maternal care, international outreach. Cameras flashed. She stood there with her jaw locked and listened to a criminal buy virtue in bulk. When the applause started, she left. She made it as far as the side corridor before he found her. Of course he did. The hallway was cooler back there, lit by a single wall lamp. It smelled faintly of lilies from the main lobby and sterilizer from the supply room. "You lied by omission," she said before he could speak. He stopped a few feet away. No guards, or none visible. "I didn't ask you who I was," he said. "No, you just let me patch up your mess in a maternity clinic and walk away thinking you were a man with inconvenient friends instead of half the city's favorite nightmare." His expression did not change, but something sharpened. "That's colorful. That's accurate." She crossed her arms because if she didn't, she might do something dramatic with her hands and give him the satisfaction of knowing he unsettled her. "You fund incubators in the daytime and bring bleeding boys to nurses at midnight," she said. "Pick a lane." For the first time, the quiet in him moved. Not anger, not exactly. More like a door opening somewhere far inside a locked building. "You think those things cancel each other out?" he asked. "No," she said. "I think you do." The corridor held its breath. He could have threatened her. Men like him usually outsourced their emotional vocabulary to fear. Instead, he looked at her the way a man looked at a puzzle he had not expected to matter. Then he stepped aside. "You should go home, Miss Cole." She stared at him for 1 beat longer, then brushed past. What she did not see was the man who emerged from the stairwell once she disappeared around the corner. Shunho was broad-shouldered, silent, and carried loyalty like a second spine. "Chairman," he said. Chae-hyun's eyes stayed on the corridor. "Make sure she gets home safely." Shunho nodded. "Without her knowing," Chae-hyun added. "She'll hate it." A soft sound from the far end of the corridor interrupted them. He turned. On the mezzanine above, a woman in cream stood with one manicured hand resting on the railing. Choi Seo-rin. Beautiful in the expensive, sharpened way certain women became when no one had told them no in years. Her mouth curved, but not with warmth. "Should I be jealous?" she asked. Chae-hyun did not answer. Seo-rin's gaze dropped to the corridor where Amara had gone, then back to him. And for the first time in a very long while, something close to panic touched the back of her throat. Because Kang Chae-hyun had looked at many women before. He had never watched one leave. If you're watching this and you can already see where this is going, drop a heart in the comments. Because this man is about to make a very big mistake called feelings. The first message came that night. No number, no greeting. "Stay away from things that do not belong to you." Amara stared at the screen in her dark apartment, the blue light turning the cracked glass in her phone into a web. Rain ticked at the window. Somewhere downstairs, somebody burned garlic in oil and the smell drifted up through the vents. She deleted the message. Then she checked the lock twice. The second message came 2 days later, this time with a photograph attached. Her building, taken from across the street. That was when anger turned practical. Dami came over with grocery bags and a mouth full of opinions. Nigerian-American, loud on purpose, soft only with people she trusted, she took one look at Amara's face and dropped the jokes immediately. "What happened?" Amara handed over the phone. Dami read the message, swore under her breath, and looked up. "Tell me you called the police." Amara laughed once, no humor in it. "And say what?" "Hello, officer. A rich criminal with excellent posture seems to have unbalanced my week." Dami set the groceries down on the counter harder than necessary. "That man is trouble." "I know. Do you?" Amara leaned against the sink and rubbed a hand over her braids, a habit she had since childhood when she needed to think. The kitchen was small but clean. Her world always was. She kept it that way out of spite more than pride. "I know enough," she said. 3 nights later, she found him outside the 24-hour convenience store near the clinic. Not inside. Outside. Standing under the awning while rain threaded silver through the streetlights. He did not seem surprised that she stopped dead at the sight of him. She marched right up anyway. "Are you following me?" He took the question the way he took most things, without flinching. "I'm making sure nobody else does." The answer hit harder than a denial would have. Cars hissed past on the wet road. The air smelled like rain on concrete and hot broth from the restaurant next door. Chae-hyun held an umbrella but had not opened it. "That's not normal," she said. "Neither is someone sending photographs of your building." She hated that he knew about that. She hated more that part of her had expected him to. "You had me watched." "I had you protected." "I didn't ask for that." "No." His gaze rested on her for a moment. "You don't ask for anything." Her hand tightened around the plastic bag of instant noodles and canned coffee. He noticed too much. That was becoming a problem. "I don't need you," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that measured and calculated and came to a conclusion. "No," he agreed quietly. "You don't. That's what makes this interesting." The rain softened. Not the tension, just the weather. She should have left. Instead, she said, "Why me?" He glanced past her toward the clinic windows across the street, where paper stars from the pediatric wing still clung to the glass. "Because you told armed men to disarm in a room full of babies and expected to be obeyed." "That's your answer?" "It's one of them." He opened the convenience store door and held it for her. She stared at his hand on the metal frame. Long fingers, scar across the knuckle. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "It's a store," he said, "not an abduction." That got the beginning of a smile out of her before she could stop it. Inside, fluorescent lights washed the world flat. She grabbed tea, crackers, ramen. He picked up nothing at all, just followed at a distance that suggested restraint and possession at war with each other. At the counter, the cashier looked from Amara to Jae-hyun and went pale. Amara paid for her things. When she turned, he was looking at a crooked row of children's drawings taped near the window. Crayoned suns, stick figure families. One blue house under a yellow star. For 8 full seconds, the most feared man in Seoul looked 12 years old and lost. The expression vanished before she could be sure she had seen it. "What?" he asked. "You know children draw better people than adults are." "Do they?" "They always make space for everybody in the picture." He was quiet for a beat. "My sister used to draw stars on everything," he said. Walls, books, shoes. It was not a full confession, just a crack. Amara did not step through it. She only nodded. Outside, under the awning again, he reached into his coat and handed her a card. No name, just a number. "If anything changes," he said. She looked at the card, then at him. "And if I throw this away?" "I'll still know if anything changes." "That's not reassuring." "It isn't meant to be." She left anyway. The first direct move came the next morning. Someone had tied a cut braid extension to her apartment door handle with white ribbon. Not hers, synthetic, cheap. But the message landed all the same. On the wall beside it, written in lipstick the color of fresh blood, "Leave soul." The hallway smelled like damp concrete and somebody's breakfast rice. Amara stood there long enough for rage to get through shock and settle into something steadier. Then her phone rang. Isaiah. She answered on the first vibration. "Why is some man sitting outside my apartment building?" he demanded from Houston. Amara's blood went cold. "What?" "He's in a black car. He hasn't moved for 2 hours. If this is your weird soul life bleeding into mine, I need you to say that now." She went very still. "Lock your door," she said. "I already did." "Don't open it for anyone." "Amara, I'll call you back." By the time she reached the street, Jae-hyun's sedan was already there. Of course it was. She yanked open the back door and got in without invitation, rain hitting her face and neck like thrown gravel. "This is on you." Jae-hyun sat across from her in the dim leather quiet of the car, Soon-ho in front, driver stone-faced. The heater ran warm, fogging the edges of the windows. "Tell me," he said. She held up the photo of the door, then the braid. His jaw changed. Barely, but enough. "And now my brother has a man outside his building in Texas." "I put him there," Jae-hyun said. Amara blinked. "You what?" "He's mine. He's there to keep your brother alive." Her anger stalled and reformed. "You don't get to place armed strangers in my family's life without asking me." "No," he said, voice low. "I get to do it when the alternative is your brother bleeding out because I respected your independence more than the threat." She hated how close that came to making sense. She hated more that fear had already imagined exactly that. "Take me home." "No." The single syllable landed between them like a lock turning. Her chin lifted. "Excuse me?" "You should have stayed where it was safe," he said. "You didn't, so now you're here." She laughed once in disbelief. "That sounded insane even to you." A pause. "Not really." The penthouse sat 47 floors above the river and looked less like a home than a place powerful men hid their sleep. Warm wood, low lights, windows wide enough to make heights feel personal. Amara stood in the middle of the living room with her overnight bag and all her suspicion. "I'm here because of Isaiah," she said. "Not because I trust you." Jae-hyun took off his coat and draped it over a chair. "I know." "Good." "Your room is down the hall on the left." He turned to leave. She stopped him. "And Sorin?" That was the first time his expression fully cooled in front of her. "What about her?" "She sent the message." "You don't know that." "I know women who treat men like territory when I see them." The silence that followed had edges. "She works for me," he said. "That's not what I asked." "No," he said again. "It isn't." That should have warned her. but people rarely understand which answer will ruin them until later. Days inside his world moved strangely. There were guards who looked away when she entered rooms, which somehow made them more noticeable. There was a cook who placed ginger tea at her elbow before she asked. There were books in the guest room she had mentioned needing for her Korean licensing exam and never told anyone about except Dami 3 weeks earlier. And on the bathroom counter, folded neatly, was a black silk scarf for sleeping in. She picked it up and stood there very still. When Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway later that evening, she held it up between 2 fingers. "You had somebody go through my life?" He leaned one shoulder against the frame. "You wrap your hair every night with an old t-shirt." Her mouth opened, closed. "The t-shirt is losing," he added. That was the kind of gesture that was hard to defend against because it was not grand. It was attention, precise and private, and almost unbearably specific. She set the scarf down. "Creepy," she muttered. "One of my softer qualities." At dinner, they argued. Of course they did. She stood by the window with the city lit beneath them like a threat dressed as jewelry. "You own hospitals," she said. "You fund scholarships. You could have chosen any life." "I did choose." "This?" He looked up from the glass in his hand. "Yes." "Why?" He took his time answering, which she was beginning to understand meant she had asked something real. "Because when I was 19, he said, men with cleaner hands than mine decided who was disposable. I made sure I would never be on that side of the table again." The words were flat. The truth beneath them wasn't. "And now you decide who's disposable?" He met her stare. "No. Now nobody decides that for me." That should have ended it. Instead, she said, "That's not the same as being innocent." His jaw flexed once. "I never said it was." Later that night, she couldn't sleep. Rain moved against the glass in soft waves, and the unfamiliar bed felt too expensive for rest. She found the kitchen light on at 2 in the morning. Jae-hyun stood at the island in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled once, reading a children's book. Not a metaphorical book, an actual picture book, worn at the edges, one page repaired with clear tape. He heard her and did not hide it. She stopped in the doorway. "I'm not even going to pretend that makes sense." "My sister's," he said. The room was warm. Cinnamon tea steamed on the counter. Beyond the windows, Seoul glowed blue-black and sleepless. "She liked the same one every night," he said. "If I skipped pages, she'd know." Amara moved closer before she decided to. "How old was she?" 12. The answer sat between them like glass. He closed the book carefully. "She died in the rain," he said. Nothing in his face shifted. That made it worse. Amara's breath caught, small and involuntary. He looked at her then, not like a man revealing weakness, but like one tired of carrying it alone in the dark. She reached for the mug on the counter just to do something with her hands. He had already added honey, exactly the amount she liked. She glanced up. "You don't miss much, do you?" "No." There was a beat, quiet, dangerous in a different way. He said something then, low and almost absent in Korean. "걱정 twai." She frowned. What does that mean? He looked at her mouth for half a second, then stepped back. "You should sleep." That was not an answer. The narrator, however, is not as disciplined as Kang Jae-hyun. What he had said was simple. "You worry me." Okay. If you are still here, and I know you are, drop a Jae-hyun in the comments right now. Because this man just said, "걱정 twai," and I need you to understand what that means. Subscribe if you haven't. Ring the bell. Do not let this story find you without a notification. 3 months later, they married in a room so small it could barely contain the silence. No white dress, no flowers, no family. Just signatures, witnesses, and Seoul's most dangerous man standing in a dark suit, while Amara wore cream and tried not to notice the way his hand tightened when the clerk said, "wife." It had begun as strategy. Sorin's pressure had escalated. Tabloids, threats, men sniffing around clinic records. A public wife created lines enemies respected because public wives changed inheritance, changed loyalty, changed the shape of revenge. But strategy had not been the whole truth for either of them. When the clerk slid the rings forward, Amara looked at Jae-hyun. "You can still say this is a bad idea." "It is," he said. She almost smiled. "That's not what I meant." His gaze held hers, steady, certain. "I know." Afterward, he took her home, to the penthouse that had stopped feeling borrowed sometime in the last month, and found, without asking, the exact recipe for pepper soup her mother used to make when weather turned mean. Scotch bonnet, ginger, too much warmth for a man like him to know. "How?" she asked when she tasted it. He loosened his tie, expression unreadable. "Dami talks when bribed with desserts." "She sold me out for cake?" "Apparently." Amara shook her head and laughed, and this time the gap in her teeth showed, and Jae-hyun went so still it was almost reverent. Peace did not arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces. In the way he turned the heat up before she complained, because he knew her hands got cold first. In the way he left the balcony door cracked one morning, because she had once said rain sounded kinder when it had somewhere to go. In the way he never entered her room without knocking, even after it became theirs. And then, one winter morning, she stood in a bright clinic bathroom with a test stick in her hand and had to sit down very carefully on the closed toilet lid. When she told him that night, he did not speak for a full 5 seconds. She watched the news leave no mark on his face and decided with immediate fury that she had miscalculated him badly. Then he set down the glass he was holding because his hand had suddenly become unreliable. "Say it again," he said. She did, slower. "I'm pregnant." He crossed the room like speed insulted him and stopped just short of touching her, as if reverence and fear had reached the same conclusion. "Are you all right?" That was his first question, not "is it mine?" Not "what now?" Not even surprise, though his eyes had widened by a fraction that on him looked catastrophic. Amara nodded once. His hand came up, then paused in the air beside her face. "Can I?" She took his wrist and placed his palm against the flat plane of her stomach. Nothing to feel yet, not really. But his throat worked once, like he had swallowed something sharp. She should have kissed him then. Instead, because life was cruel and timing had always treated them like a joke, Sorin made her move. The betrayal came in pieces too. First, Amara found old tabloid photos in a search she had not meant to make. Jae-hyun stepping out of a gala with Sorin on his arm. Rumors, headlines, whispers about the woman everyone expected him to marry before the mysterious American nurse appeared. Then she learned Sorin still had access to private floors at Hanul Tower, still handled sensitive accounts, still moved around his world with a kind of confidence Amara had not been warned about. When she confronted him, dusk had already turned the penthouse windows black. "You left her close to us," she said. Jae-hyun stood by the bar, hands braced against polished wood. I left her where I could see her. That is not the same thing. She's useful. She wants me gone. A long pause. I know. There it was. Not ignorance, not oversight. Knowledge. Amara did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying in front of the wrong people was a form of surrender. She kept her face still. She kept her voice level. But her hands, she couldn't stop her hands from shaking just slightly, and he saw it. He saw it, and he said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that would matter yet. The next day, on the way back from an appointment, the SUV meant to bring her home took a wrong turn. Amara noticed too late. The driver wasn't theirs. She reached for the door handle just as something sweet and chemical hit the air from a cloth pressed hard over her mouth. When she woke, the room was cold. Concrete floor, one hanging bulb, rain somewhere outside, steady against metal. Her wrists were tied to a chair. Her head hurt. Her stomach clenched with a panic so violent she bent over it instinctively. Sorin stepped into the light wearing cream. Of course she did. She always looked like innocence had been professionally tailored. "You took everything too easily," Sorin said. Amara's mouth was dry. "If you're going to monologue, at least make it original." Sorin smiled. Still rude. Still alive, Amara thought. That was something. "You think he chose you," Sorin said, circling slowly. "Do you know how long I built his world for him? Do you know what I cleaned up, what I buried, what I became, so men would fear the name he carries?" Amara lifted her chin. "And still he didn't marry you." The slap came fast. Sorin stood there breathing harder than the hit justified, one manicured hand trembling. "There it is," Amara said softly, blood at the corner of her mouth. "That's the truth, isn't it?" The next part happened quickly. A knife, not against skin, against braid. One thick section cut free and hit the floor. For half a second, the room disappeared. Not because the pain was physical, because black women knew what hair carried. Memory, labor, identity, mother's hands, Saturday mornings, survival. The crown you built yourself when the world insisted on reaching for it. "Stop," Seorin said, almost lazily as her people held Amara's shoulders. "You're acting as if this matters." It mattered. The buzzing clippers at Amara's temple were louder than they should have been. The violence was brief. The humiliation lasted longer. By the time Seorin stepped back, Amara's scalp burned in the cold air, and the floor beside her was dark with severed braids. Seorin crouched in front of her. "When he finds out you ran," she said, voice silk smooth, "I'll be the one still standing beside him." Amara stared at her so hard it almost passed for calm. "You should pray," Amara whispered. Seorin laughed. Then they dragged her outside and left her in the rain. It was an old service road near a shuttered chapel on the edge of the city. No traffic, no witnesses, just freezing water and mud and the sound of her own breathing trying to remember how to work. She got to her knees first, then one foot, then the other. She put both hands over her stomach and walked. One step, then another. By the time Dami found her, because Sun Ho's emergency message had gone to the only second number Amara ever used, she was still moving. 3 days later, in a hospital 2 districts away under a false name, the doctor stared at the monitor and said, There are 3. Amara turned her head. 3 what? The doctor smiled in disbelief. Heartbeats. For one suspended second, the whole ruined world held still. Then, everything changed shape. 3 years later, Amara came back to Seoul with a shaved past grown into a crown of soft curls, 3 little boys in matching navy coats, and enough patience to be dangerous. She had not intended to return, not after the rain, not after the silence that followed, not after the news footage Dami showed her from that week, Jae-hyun at a press conference, face carved from stone, Seorin standing 3 feet behind him in pearl earrings while reporters shouted about family, scandal, disappearance. He had looked furious. He had looked murderous. He had not looked like a man who knew where she was. But grief and love were both terrible translators. She had taken his silence as choice and vanished before his world could find her sons. Pusan had given her anonymity, a small apartment above a bakery, clinic shifts, toys underfoot. 3 baby boys with his eyes and her stubbornness. Micah was watchful. Malik talked first and thought second. Min-jun, the smallest by 4 minutes, smiled like he knew secrets adults didn't. She built a life, not easy, not grand, real. Then 2 weeks before Malik turned 3, Sun-ho found her. He did not come with guards. He came alone to the clinic where she worked, stood in the doorway with rain on his shoulders, and handed her a flash drive. Chair.